So when the tour was about over for him, he started to go through this transition. And it was phenomenal for me to see someone at the end of a 37-year career realize that it's kind of over, even though he had this amazing position lined up at the CIA. And there's a story in the book about how that position came about. Again, he was such a war hero and celebrity, and had been kind of heralded as the greatest leader in his generation of military officers. So a lot of people didn't understand why he wasn't selected to become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Part of it was he has a very big personality, and it was thought that he would resist whatever guidance was given from the White House. So he was told by Secretary Gates that he was doing a great job with the surge in Afghanistan at the time. I know Afghanistan has kind of gone south quickly, but at the time when the surge was there, violence was down by 50%. And we saw a lot of metrics that showed that the surge was working and that governance was improving, that there was economic development activity and so forth. And Secretary Gates said to him, "You have made a difference. We're all very thankful and grateful for what you've done, but you have not been considered for chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." And so Petraeus suggested the CIA. And I think it's because he had a vision for the way the military would change now. We will no longer commit to large-scale, boots-on-the-ground operation like we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. We can't afford it. It costs $1 million a year to send a soldier to Afghanistan. We've spent $500 billion, I think, total on the war in Afghanistan. Wouldn't it be great if we spent that on education? And I asked that as a military officer who did believe in the mission there. So he saw that war was changing from that type of operation to more covert wars, and that the CIA would be a place that he could still be in the arena, if you will. And I can answer questions about how he's enjoying that experience now, but suffice it to say, he's one of those guys, probably like you, Chancellor, likes to be in the arena, where the action is, making a difference. And it's wonderful that we have heroes like that put duty, honor, country before themselves, before their families, and they just continue to serve. So obviously it was a great experience for me to be able to travel with him, to deduce his life lessons, and to try to figure out how can we encourage other young leaders to be all they can be and to serve their country first. Now, obviously another thing I saw while I was in Afghanistan is the valorous duty and performance of our troopers over there. I spent a lot of time embedded at the company level, going out on patrols with infantry troops. It was unusual to be in that position as a journalist rather than in uniform, but also a great experience. And one thing that we all know about that has happened because of these wars is obviously the loss of life. Around 7,000 young troopers have given the ultimate sacrifice. About 45,000 of our veterans, our war warriors, have physical wounds, amputations, multiple amputations. But 10 times that many, 450,000 veterans who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan, suffer from invisible wounds, post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, and other sort of psychological wounds that you can't necessarily see. They don't get a Purple Heart. They're often stigmatized, and it's difficult for them to kind of reintegrate into society. So I've taken the opportunity on my book tour to speak about some of their issues and to try to give back through book proceeds, through mentoring wounded warriors and so forth. And I ask that each of you, whatever your fields are, go back and look at how you can hire veterans, how you can get involved in wounded warrior organizations, how the university can help veterans to contribute here, because I think so many of them are resilient and have amazing leadership experiences. At the age of 25, they've been mayors in foreign countries. They've been managing millions of dollars worth of equipment and lives, obviously. They're going to be our future leaders in our country. So bringing them into the university, enriching the classroom with their experiences, I think very beneficial for the university. So I will stop there. I'd love to take your questions about Afghanistan, about General David Petraeus, about women in the military. We've come a long way, or anything else. And again, I want to thank the university for bringing me back. It's just wonderful to be back in familiar terrain. Next time, hopefully you can do this during ski season. But thank you again. It's a privilege to be here. Well, I think we have microphones, so awesome. Got one behind you there.
When was the last time that we fought a uniformed military?
Well, they're wearing uniforms. I shouldn't laugh about this, but for example, they're wearing ours in some cases, right? Some of these guys in Afghanistan. Well, the Taliban do often wear uniforms, their own uniforms, but you're talking about a conventional war, presumably, and that's going back to Korea. Now, will we fight another conventional war? Maybe that's the hidden question in what you're asking. The U.S. military thinks we may, and so we will continue to prepare for what is called full spectrum operations. We need to be prepared for a ground war. We need to keep our tanks in line, our artillery lined up, and our troopers trained to use that conventional warfare equipment. But at the other end of the spectrum, it's more likely that we'll face insurgencies and smaller conflicts. So trying to retain some of the skills that we've gained in these wars is very important. And even further beyond that end of the spectrum is cyber warfare, which our country is at war right now with countries that are using cyber warfare to attack government agencies, our banking sector, and the energy grid, and other infrastructure. So I don't think a hacker or the Iranians or the Chinese or other countries that have malicious intent to attack us in the cyber world, they probably aren't wearing uniform. And yet I would agree that we need to be prepared for full spectrum operations.
I have a question about sort of the social side of what our troops do in Afghanistan and other places. Can you respond to that a little bit?
The social side?
Well, building social structures, those kind of educational structures, those kind of things.
Sure. Well, these two wars have, in Iraq, after the invasion, the basic services in that country were destroyed. So when there was no longer a government in place, when the Baathists were fired and chased away or went underground, there was no central government to provide the pay to keep the hospitals going, to keep the schools going, and so forth. And a lot of that infrastructure was destroyed because of what we did. So many of our troopers focused right away on continuing to fight and stop the insurgency. This is in the early years of the war in Iraq, but also to reestablish those basic services. Now, some had no experience. We certainly had no training. I never had any counterinsurgency training until well into the war. We started to update our educational system. It's unfortunate that we're not a more flexible organization like a university, but it's a fact. There was resistance to ever conducting a counterinsurgency again. So even though we were fighting one, we weren't calling it one for many years. But thankfully, some of our troops had been in Haiti and done nation building. They'd been in Kosovo and dealt with the same thing. After the invasion there were no basic services. So first you have to establish Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You have to establish the basic services, water, sanitation, food, healthcare, and so forth. And then you start to focus on economic development. And is that a job for the military? That's the larger question. The State Department doesn't necessarily have the capacity in numbers, so it became a job for the military. So we started, as the military does, to adapt to that and to try to teach our soldiers how to not necessarily build a hospital, but to work with NGOs and other organizations that had those critical skills in order to improve basic services, but also get the economy running. So I write about in the book, and I saw how some of these young leaders were focused on how can we reestablish trade between northern Iraq and Turkey and Syria, because they had to get oil flowing again. They wanted to be able to sell Iraqi oil so that Iraqis could have some kind of income, right? And they're working on how to attract foreign direct investment, how to get the hotels up and running again, how to attract tourists. I don't think that's a job for the military necessarily, but it's wonderful that our troopers can adapt to that environment. So it was taught after we got into the wars, and now we've kind of gotten away from it again. The question is who will do that in the future. Now, the new model is to have small packages, small quick reaction forces go and do foreign internal defense, which is something the Special Forces community has done for many decades. But basically, you're not focused on nation building, you're focused on helping that country that's a failing state to stand up their own internal security forces and defense and police and so forth, so they can provide security. So NGOs and other organizations can come in and work more on the nation building aspect. But they're great skills, again, you know, in talking about these veterans that have learned to do this, and they're in their 20s and 30s, they will impact our society in a very positive way in the future.
With your desire to be the National Security Advisor, have you had a chance to visit with others, with Condoleezza Rice and Madeleine Albright, with the DU connection?
I was telling some students today that somebody told me this once, and I was passing it on to this next generation, to come up with my personal advisory board, a dream sort of advisory board. I may never meet the people, maybe they may be dead people, but people that I saw as role models. And of course, Condi and Madeleine Albright were on that advisory board. I've met Madeleine Albright twice. She wouldn't remember who I am. I've never met Condoleezza Rice. They're in my social circles, they're both one step removed. It would, you know, but I think mentoring relationships are best when they're organic, and I just haven't had an opportunity to work with them. But obviously, truly great role models. Another thing I encouraged the students today to do was to study their role models' CVs and figure out how they got where they want to go, which is why I was trying to have a conversation with you, Provost, about that position, because that's something Condoleezza Rice did before she went to become National Security Advisor. And it's part of the reason I chose to pursue a PhD. I thought that kind of background could help me. It's helped Maddie and Condi, if you will. So never had the chance to interact with them, but truly great role models and inspirations.
In Iraq, there's sort of an internal civil war with the Shiites and the Sunnis and the Kurds. Is that prevalent in Afghanistan? And what are we doing to try to understand those different groups?
Well, that's a great question. And we have a difficult time, we, the U.S. government, we, the military, in understanding the human terrain, as we call it. As an intel officer, as a military officer, I'm taught to understand the geography, right? And you typically had guys in uniform that were the Nazis, or one group that was kind of a demographic that had similar goals. But it's very difficult to do the human terrain mapping in these countries. We still don't understand the full tribal network in Iraq. Afghanistan is even more complicated, and they've never had a federal society there. So trying to impose our Western way of governance and so forth in a country that hasn't had it for decades, you know, there's no institutional memory amongst the living Afghans really about what it could look like. And frankly speaking, this is kind of getting off the topic, but when you've been at war for 30 years, your entire society has post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's very difficult to work with that community. But the concern in Afghanistan is that if we have this precipitous pullout, we have a drawdown, we need to draw down, but it's still too fast. The Afghan National Security Forces are not ready to prevent a civil war, and it is such a tribal society. It will never not be a tribal society. We need to understand that about some of these countries we get involved in. But understanding how the networks work, how you can create alliances if it's at all possible, is critical. I don't have an answer to that. It's very difficult. But part of it depends on the leadership, obviously. Karzai is a Pashtun, and he favors Pashtuns. And so that plays into everything we've done there. Security, who gets named to be the security chief, the mayors and governors and so forth in districts and provinces. And it plays into who gets the contracts for economic development activities and so forth. So it's a fact of life that we have to realize. There are probably professors at this university who can answer that question a lot better than I can, though. Back.
Thanks for taking my question. General Petraeus, in his new role, has a very difficult situation now in the center of the situation in Benghazi. Do you have any comment?
Well, just to create some context for those in the room, as you know, the ambassador in Benghazi was killed along with a couple of security agents who happened to be CIA security paramilitary forces. That just came out today in Fox News. But the challenge has been the fog of war. And the greater challenge is that it's political hunting season, and so this whole thing has been turned into a very political sort of arena, if you will. But the facts that came out today were that the ground forces there at the CIA annex, which is different from the consulate, were requesting reinforcements. They were requesting it's called the Sinks in Extremis Force, a group of Delta Force operators, are most talented guys we have in the military. They could have come and reinforced the consulate and the CIA annex that were under attack. Now, I don't know if a lot of you have heard this, but the CIA annex had actually had taken a couple of Libyan militia members prisoner, and they think that the attack on the consulate was an effort to try to get these prisoners back. So that's still being vetted. The challenging thing for General Petraeus is that in his new position, he's not allowed to communicate with the press. So he's known all of this. They had correspondence with the CIA station chief in Libya. Within 24 hours, they kind of knew what was happening. But if you remember at the time, the Muslim video, the Muhammad video that came out, the demonstrations that were going on in Cairo, there were demonstrations in 22 other countries around the world, tens of thousands of people. And our government was very concerned that this was going to become a nightmare for us. So you can understand if you put yourself in his shoes or Secretary Clinton's shoes or the president's shoes that we thought it was tied somehow to the demonstrations in Cairo. And it's true that we have signal intelligence that shows the militia members in Libya were watching the demonstration in Cairo, and it did sort of galvanize their effort. So we'll find out the facts soon enough. As a former intel officer, it's frustrating to me because it reveals our sources and methods. I don't think the public necessarily needs to know all of that. It is a tragedy that we lost an ambassador and 2 other government officials, and there was a failure in the system because there was additional security requested, but it's frustrating to see the sort of political aspect of what's going on with this whole investigation. So the most recent news that came out was a Fox report by Jennifer Griffin. I got it on a distribution list I'm on, and it has some pretty insightful stuff in it, if you want to look for it.
Hi, I'm just, I just want your opinion actually on, there's all this media attention not too long ago about the sexual assaults and the cover-up of the armed forces for women. Being the mother of a young girl, I'd be hard-pressed to encourage her into the armed forces. What's your opinion about what does the armed services have to do to protect our young women?
Mm-hmm. Well, that is a tough issue that the military is dealing with right now, and it's wonderful that this documentary called The Invisible War has just come out, and it's an expose on the number of women that have been raped or sexually abused in the military. It's about 19,000, and we think that's only 1/3 of the cases. So that's really a tragedy and an epidemic. It's critical. I'm thankful to say I've never had an incident in my career. I've never had any kind of sexual harassment. I'm grateful for the martial arts training I've had and also sniper training. So maybe part of that, I have a deterrent mechanism. But a lot of our young women don't, and so we've got to help them. The big challenge is that in the military, if you have some kind of sexual harassment or abuse, you report it through your chain of command. Now, what if it's your boss, your squad leader, or your company commander who's just conducted this egregious behavior? It's not fair to the woman, or man, frankly. There are a lot of men that are raped in the military, too. It's not insignificant. So what the military's done is try to take the investigation mechanism outside of a unit and create all these hotlines. And we've had these for a while, but you have to educate the troops on how they can seek help and so forth. So this brings the larger question of should women be in combat, where you're in an even more hostile, austere environment and rather isolated, if you will. Women are in combat, and our ground combat exclusion policy is anachronistic. Thankfully, DoD overturned a couple of policies earlier this year in January and opened up 14,000 more positions for women, but there's still 250,000 that women are excluded from. But do you feel like women should have the equal opportunity? You have a daughter. Of course you want her to have great opportunities. But should they have the opportunity, if they're physically fit and mentally agile and so forth, to be all they can be? There's a lot of discussion about this in the military right now. I'm a huge advocate for women's opportunities. Having served in the Special Forces community and and seen women perform on many different levels. I think it comes down to leadership. The leaders in every unit, whether it's a squad, platoon, company, battalion, brigade, have to set the right tone. And if a commander sets the right tone, then abuse will not be tolerated. If a commander sets the right tone, then women can be integrated and can fully have all of those opportunities. But you have to have the right leadership example there. Are we done or one more? Okay. They're cutting me off, so all right, thank you.